Good morning, everyone. Good morning. To start things off, I would like to say thank you to the CUUC and also to Jen and to Steve, but I also want to make sure I take a special opportunity to say thank you to Sandy. I know that she is not here, but I did want to make sure I spoke about her, and I wish her a quick recovery, and I hope that she's able to get well soon. So to start things off, I also want to talk about what my presentation is going to be about. The title of my presentation is Demand the Change You Hope to Be Able to See. And I also want to make sure I talk about who I am. I am an election attorney, and I'm also a voting rights attorney. But with that, I do want to point out that I'm not the first in my generation to do this kind of work, but I'm also not the first of my name to do this kind of work either. My grandfather was, in fact, the first Black judge of Dallas County. Thank you. Thank you. And the reason why I bring that up is because 60 years ago, he was fighting the same fights that we are fighting today. And that is the reality of the world that we are living in. And I want to make sure that I recognize that, because I see it as being upon myself to continue to push things forward and to make sure that all of us have the information that we need to make sure that we have our voices heard. Because at the end of the day, that is something that we have to do. And the reality is we have to demand that our voices are heard for that to happen. So with that, I want to make sure I'm able to walk everyone through what this presentation is going to look like. I'm going to walk through the reality of what people ended up facing in the election. I'm also going to talk about the redistricting process as well. I'm also going to take the time to walk through vote by mail. And lastly, I'm going to touch on the very important dates whenever it comes to the election. I'm also going to lead everyone with some words from Frederick Douglass that mean a lot to me. Because whenever we talk about our ability to have a voice, once again, this is not a present thing. This is something that has building and people have been fighting for generations. So like I said, I'm going to start off with the election facts and reality. And the reality of what people ended up seeing during the 2020 election and during the March primary was long lines, people who were very confused about who was on the ballot. And this is from the top down. People were also incredibly confused about what the ID laws were. Also concerns about whether or not people were going to be showing up at the polls in order to intimidate them, or whether or not they even felt comfortable trying to vote in the first place. But that is the reality of what people faced. But unfortunately, that was also the reality of what people ended up seeing during the March primary as well. And the reason why I bring that up is because during the 2020 general election, we saw counties like Dallas County. We also saw counties like Harris County actively try to make sure that they were able to expand the ability to be able to vote. Some counties had 24-hour voting. Some counties also had drive-through voting. Processes that were in place in order to make the voting process as easy and as simple as possible. But unfortunately, because of that, we ended up seeing the state of Texas respond in such a negative fashion in order to make the voting process harder and harder on people to be able to vote. In fact, the state of Texas is the hardest state to be able to vote in this country. And the reason why I am here today and the reason why I do the work that I do is to make sure that I give everyone the knowledge, the resources, and the tools to be able to navigate a system that is incredibly difficult. And also with the legislation that was passed, it became increasingly more clear what the intent of the state legislature was supposed to do. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because this is not a partisan issue. This is a democratic issue. In order for us to be able to preserve our democracy, we need to make sure that we all have a place and we all have a voice in this system. And something that I tell people is this: if we don't speak up, someone is going to speak up for us. And the reality is that they won't have our best intentions in mind. Also, I want to make sure I touch on voter suppression, because that is a word that gets tossed around a lot, but I want to make sure that everyone has a clear idea of what that is. It is so much more than telling people whenever they show up to the polls, you cannot vote. It starts earlier than that. It starts with the fact that in the state of Texas, you have to register to vote 30 days before Election Day. 30 days before Election Day in order to be considered eligible to be able to vote. And the reason why I bring that up is because you have states like Illinois where you have same-day voter registration, meaning that you can show up register, and vote on the same day. And I'll also want to talk about the vote by mail process, because in other states like Colorado, there is the eligibility standards to be able to vote by mail are a lot lower than there are in Texas, which means that people who want to be able to vote by mail are able to do so. Meaning that if you don't feel comfortable going into a polling location, that you will be eligible to vote by mail rather than having to meet the specific standards that the state of Texas sets out for you. But also, whenever it comes to voter suppression, it also looks like gerrymandering. And that is the reason why I'm going to talk about redistricting. Now, for the redistricting process, every 10 years, because of the census, we have to go through a redistricting process, meaning that everything from our state senate, our congressional districts, all the way down to our city council districts and our precincts have to get reorganized. But with that, we end up seeing a situation where our voters are not able to pick our politicians. We live in a system where our politicians are able to pick our voters, where they are the ones who are able to say, I want this group to vote for me because I know that they will. I don't want this group to vote for me because they know that they won't. And that, unfortunately, is the reality of the world that we live in, which once again makes the process of us being able to have our voices heard harder and harder. And with that, the reality is with redistricting, even though it gets harder and harder, but it also makes politics, it makes our rights, it makes our values more of a game than anything else. It is about what people can do in order to maintain and retain power. That is the ultimate goal of redistricting. But unfortunately, that is where we are. And I see the work that I do is to be able to make sure that I'm providing everyone with the information, with the actual reality and the facts that we all face. Because if I'm not doing that, who can we rely on to do so? Now I'm going to touch on vote by mail. And the reason why I'm going to touch on vote by mail is because I also want to make sure I touch on who is eligible to vote by mail. And like I said earlier, in the state of Colorado, the vote by mail eligibility is a lot lower than it is in the state of Texas. In the state of Texas, in order to be able to vote by mail, you have to be 65 years or older. 65 years or older, meaning that you're cutting out an entire generation, multiple generations of people who want to be able to vote by mail. You also have to be sick or disabled to be able to vote by mail. And another standard is you have to be incarcerated or in jail in order to be eligible. But the reality of the world that we live in is if you are in jail and you want to be able to vote, more likely than not, those resources, not only to be able to get your vote by mail ballot or your vote by mail application, but simply even being able to register to vote, you won't be able to have access to. Now, I'm not even talking about the people who have been convicted of a felony. I'm talking about the people who are being kept in holding, people who have not had a final conviction at all. That is the reality of the world that we live in. Also, I want to point out that in order to even be able to get and submit your applications, you are not even able to submit them online. You are not able to submit them online. The state of Texas also doesn't even have voter registration online. You're able to update your address. You're able to check your vote by mail ballot. You're able to do all that online, but unfortunately you cannot register to vote online. But once again, that is the reality of the world that we live in. And if we aren't able to see the world that we live in, how can we hope to be able to change it? Now I'm also going to talk about the vote by mail deadlines. With the vote by mail deadlines, the deadline is October 28th. October 28th, which is not that far ahead of the election day. But in order for your vote by mail to be counted, it has to be received by the elections department on election day. Or if you received it and mailed it on election day, it has to be postmarked by 7 p.m. on election day and be received by the elections department by the close of business the following day. By the close of business the following day. As ridiculous as that is once again the world that we live in. And the reason why I tell people to get their application in early, get your ballot in early, is because if you get it in early enough, we might be able to do something about it. If there are any issues, we might be able to make the changes that we need to in order to make sure that your application is accepted, but also to make sure that your ballot is counted. But if you wait until the last deadline day, anything can happen. And I'm going to speak on this specifically about Dallas County. I've seen firsthand that Dallas County has received applications on the deadline day, but have said that they are so far at capacity that they aren't able to process those applications. That they weren't able to process the applications. That is the reality once again. So we have to make sure that we are doing everything as early as possible, because if we wait until the last possible minute, there may be nothing that we can do. We may follow the rule of the law, get the application in on the deadline day, but still our application might not be processed. And even if our application is processed by the deadline day, there is no true reality which we can bank on the fact that we would get our ballots before election day, or even our ballots before the polls close. I have also seen firsthand, where people who wanted to be able to vote by mail didn't end up getting their ballot until after the election was over. Until after the election was over. That is the world that we live in. So we have to make sure we get everything done early. We cannot leave anything to chance, because if we do, odds are it will not fall in our favor. Now I'm going to talk about the vote by mail rejection rate. The rejection rate. During the March primary, there was a rejection rate of over 12%. And this is just for the ballots in the state of Texas. But I do want to point out that this number is not entirely true. And the reason why I point that out is because we're talking about the rejection of the ballots, not the rejection of the applications. The state of Texas ended up changing the vote by mail applications, the applications themselves, in December of last year. Meaning that not only did you have confusion with voters who wanted to vote by mail, but counties who also needed to process the applications were entirely confused as well. But not only that, the Secretary of State's office also wasn't provided proper instruction on how they needed to process the applications. And because of that, not only did we see a high vote by mail ballot rejection rate, but in some counties we ended up seeing rejection rates of over 50%. Of over 50% of the applications, because people did not know how they needed to fill them out. There is a section of the vote by mail application that requires people who want to vote by mail to put in one of two numbers. They can either put in their Texas driver's license number, their Texas identification card number, or the last four digits of their social security number. But the number that you put down has to be the number that's affiliated with their voter registration record. And for a lot of people, that number was the number that they used whenever they initially registered to vote. Whenever they initially registered to vote. So for some people, that was a number that they put down 50 years ago. 50 years ago. And the state of Texas is asking for that person to remember what number that they used in order to be able to submit their vote by mail application. So whenever it comes to these applications, I do my best to tell people, put both numbers. Don't leave anything to chance. Put both numbers on the application and put both numbers on the ballot. Because something that also happens is somebody will put one number on the application and another number on the ballot, and that'll be a reason why the ballot won't be accepted. Once again, that is the reality of the world that we live in. And if we don't see the world as it actually is, once again, how can we hope to change it? And now I'm going to talk about election protection. So election protection is the work to make sure that every eligible voter is able to have their ballot cast and counted. And that is work that is not only being done in the state of Texas, but that is work that is being done across this country, because it is work that is desperately needed. And if you're confused on how you need to contact those resources, how do you make sure, if you have any questions, how can you make sure that you're able to contact the people who are able to answer them? I made sure to put the phone number on the screen. And that is 866-R-VOTE. 866-R-VOTE is a resource that is available to you. Now, there are partisan resources, but once again, there are also nonpartisan resources in order to make sure that if you have a question, once again, it is able to be answered. And I also want to make sure I point this out. Do not hesitate to ask questions. Whether you're calling into the hotline or whether you're asking your neighbors or whether you're asking the members of this church, ask the question. Because the reality is also this: if you have that question, someone else probably does too. If you are confused about the process, other people are as well. Because that is, once again, the world that we live in. And now I'm also going to touch about the important dates. The important dates of the election are this: October 11th. October 11th is the last day to be able to register to vote in order to be able to vote in the general election. And I also want to point out that the first day of early voting is October 24th. Now, we have 2 weeks of early voting and we have election day. I do my best to tell people this: election day shouldn't be the biggest day that we turn out to vote. Election day is the last day that we're able to vote. Because once again, if you wait until the last possible minute to vote, anything can happen. Anything could happen. You could get a flat tire. You can not feel well. There could be a long line. Anything can happen if you wait until the last possible minute. So do it early. Do it early. Because if anything happens, you will have another opportunity to be able to do so. But if you wait until the last possible minute, there will be nothing that you are able to do. Also, I want to point out there are resources that are available to you. The county that you live in has resources, so you'll be able to know what the wait times are at your polling location. And the reason why I bring that up is this: if people only vote at a certain number of early voting locations, if people only vote at a certain number of election day locations, that adds fuel to the fire for people to be able to say, we don't need 400 plus election day locations. If people are only going to vote at 200 of them, why do we need this other 250? These other 250, there's no need for it. So use all the resources that are available to you. Use the early voting locations that are around. Make sure that you use, once again, every tool that is at your disposal. Because if you do that, we can make sure that you are able to have a voice in this process. And like I said earlier, the last day to get your vote by mail application in is October 28th. But I don't want everyone to see that deadline as a deadline for which we need to get it in by. Get it in early. Because as I said, anything could happen the closer that we get to that deadline day. And lastly, I want to leave everyone with this. It is a quote from Frederick Douglass. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and it never will. Find out just what people will submit to, and you have found out the exact amount of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. And these will continue until they are resisted with either words or blows, or by both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. There's a reason why I picked this quote. Even though that quote is over 150 years old, the words that he spoke then are also true today. We have to demand that our voices are heard. But with that, it takes courage. It takes courage. This work is not easy. But we have to do something today to make sure that yesterday's past does not become tomorrow's future. That is the reality. And with that, I also want to just leave everyone with this. I just want to say thank you for this opportunity. I am very blessed and highly favored in order to be able to be here today. And I will be sticking around for church chats. So if anyone has any other questions about the voting process, I will be available and I will hand out my business card. I will give out my phone number to whoever needs it. Because the reality is also this: if we aren't doing this work, how can we expect other people to do so? And I just want to say thank you, because it is definitely an honor to be able to be here. And if y'all need anything, please just let me know. Thank you very much.